I and many of you in this room have had a long association with the theater. And you would certainly agree with me at that when I say what I'm about to say. Only 3 organizations own all of the theaters on the Great White Way. Own all of the theaters in New York. Only 3 organizations. But if you are attached in some fashion to a Broadway show, and there is nothing more thrilling, when you arrive at the theater, you don't meet or even see any of those theater owners. No Mr. Schubert, no Mrs. Niederlander, or no Mr. Jujamson. Instead, you meet the formidable union team, the union bosses who control each theater. They are the ones who determine when set pieces are to be delivered, whether or not you even have light or heat or sound or a clean dressing room, and they determine when you can get on the stage to rehearse. You know what I'm talking about. If they are not present, nothing can take place in that theater, nothing. Their jobs are passed down from father to daughter, from father to son. Those jobs are extremely lucrative. Yes, the theater makes lots of money for the owners, but if anyone crosses a union worker, including a messenger from one of the owners, that messenger may be subject to verbal abuse and sometimes even physical abuse. That is how the tenants of the vineyard in this latest Jesus story, in this latest what heaven is like story that Jesus is telling, that's how they were treating the messenger sent by the landlord. The landowner, okay Randy, God, had made everything ready for the tenants, aka the temple priests and the elders of the people to use. God had made the vineyard, prepared the vineyard for them. By use, God intended the welcoming of all people into the vineyard, the garden of God, and cultivating the people in their charge, using the love and the nurture of God. When the chief priests and elders started to take advantage of the people and extort the people for personal gain, the Lord sent messengers in the form of prophets to their vineyard, to the garden. Prophets like Amos, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, Stephen, John the Baptist, just to name a few. While some prophets lived to be a ripe old age, all of these prophets that I have just named were beaten and slain by the temple authorities for daring to speak directly to the people on God's behalf, for daring to warn the priests and the elders that they were leading the people astray. And Jesus, predicting his own death, said, finally, the landowner sent the landowner's own son, saying, surely they would not hurt the heir. They would not hurt him. He is the bringer of all good things. But you know what they did to the heir. You know what they did to that messenger. You know what the temple priests and the elders tried to do to the message. And to top it all off, the elders and the priests did not even know, as Randy read in the text, that Jesus was describing them to them. So Jesus, asking the unsuspecting temple authorities, what should happen to the tenants who disrespect and kill all of the messengers, even the landlord's own son? Jesus couldn't have been more obvious. And the gullible chief priests and the gullible elders jumped right in, saying, the landowner should put those miserable wretches to a miserable death and replace them with better, more cooperative tenants. And then Jesus revealed to them, you are the builders of God's salvation right here in the vineyard, and I, the heir, the stone that you have rejected, am right in front of your face becoming the chief cornerstone of this new work that God is building in spite of you. In spite of you. Anyone who falls on this stone will be totally crushed, and this stone will destroy anyone on whom it falls. Wow. Those are tough words. Even though it was the elders and the chief priests who unknowingly decreed their own death, Jesus called himself a stone that breaks people into pieces. Jesus seems to be revealing a very retaliatory and vindictive God. What about God's covenant of forgiveness and love? Matthew's congregation, where people might have actually seen and known Jesus, is a lot different than the 21st century churches where you and I worship. I love Kelly Clarkson's anthem that you hear everywhere. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The good news of the gospel tells us, 21 centuries later, there are numerous ways to start again, always a way to reinvent. And even if you fall on the stone that the builders rejected, and we all will, we all have. And even if that stone crushes you, and it will crush us all, out of your brokenness, Jesus is making something finer, something stronger, something new. As the song that Cheryl sang said so beautifully this morning, even if you're broken, God still loves you. Richard Spalding says that Christ, the stone that the builders rejected, is not so much a divine projectile aimed at transgressors, as much as it is a force of nature that exposes the pain and the sorrow that we visit on each other. And that stone, that crushing stone, teaches us how to be broken, and in our brokenness be better by treating each other better. Have any of you seen the AT&T internet commercial starring Angelica Houston and Mark Wahlberg? It's on about every 2 minutes. Actors in the business have one word for that commercial: cha-ching. Actor, producer, singer, and former teen idol Mark Wahlberg was born in Dorchester, Massachusetts, a small community annexed to Boston. Dorchester is a culturally diverse community, but not always a culturally friendly neighborhood. There are sections that are claimed by one cultural and racial group, and sections that are the territory of another. When Mark was a little boy in Dorchester, he and his friends quickly earned reputations as tough guys. They beat up anybody who was from outside of their neighborhood, and at 15, Mark faced civil action for throwing rocks and shouting racial epithets at African American children. At 16, Wahlberg was charged with attempted murder for indifferent incidents on the same night, assaulting 2 middle-aged Vietnamese men. Mark Wahlberg was sentenced to significant prison time. Mark said, as soon as I began my life of crime, there was always a voice in my head telling me I was going to end up in jail. 3 of my brothers had done time. My sister went to prison so many times I lost count. Finally, I was there. I was locked up with the guys that I always wanted to be like. Now I'd earned my stripes, and I was just like them. And I realized it wasn't the place I wanted to be at all. I ended up in the worst place I could possibly imagine, and I never wanted to go back. I was broken. Jesus had to put me back together again, says Wahlberg. With all of his fame and success, a still broken, far from perfect Mark Wahlberg goes to worship, goes to Mass every day, asking God to put him back together. Perhaps asking God to forgive him for the number of messengers that he beat up and terrorized and nearly killed in God's vineyard, in God's garden. Messengers are coming to the garden and the vineyard alone, as the hymn says. And they are broken, and we are broken. Are we abusing the messages of God as we stare at devastated Americans on an island living in the squalor that just a few weeks ago was their beautiful homes in Puerto Rico, with no water, no food, no medicine, no electricity, and no relief from the heat? As some make light of their plight, not understanding the gravity, the life and death gravity of the situation. Do we remember or do we forget to even think about the messages of Charlotte, West Virginia, Houston, Texas, Florida, Montana, Nebraska, Sierra Leone, Africa, and a host of other places that have been impacted this year alone, which is not nearly over, by human-made or natural disasters? We just shake our heads and look at Hurricane Nate. Have our hearts turned to stone? Do we refuse to be ground down and broken as the stone that the builders rejected to break us all speaks to us as we reflect on that just a 40-minute plane ride away? Las Vegas was turned into a shooting gallery because semi-automatic weapons are so easy to get. And someone or a party of someone who was not broken by the stone that the builders rejected, but life broken, was taking out their issues of anger and hurt on innocent people. Are we contrite and penitent and broken as we are advised that in the wake of the Las Vegas atrocity, now is not the time to raise the issue of gun control? When is the time? When you and I finally personally know someone who was slaughtered? When the one that is slaughtered for no reason is you? Is us? Jesus was himself a Jew. Jesus was drawing a line in the sand between himself and not all Jewish people. No, never believe that. He was drawing a line in the sand between himself and leaders who were abusing God's will for God's people. You and I have seen that played out over and over in our lives. People courageous enough to draw a line in the sand for people, on behalf of people of color, on behalf of the LGBT community, on behalf of homeless people, on behalf of old people, on behalf of women, on behalf of differently abled people. Leaders who were abusing God's will for God's people. Brokenness meant one thing. It meant that the old ways of using God's name to persecute the world would no longer prevail. For you and I, Christ's message, Christ's invitation to become broken by the stone that the builders rejected offers us a way to be dead to ourselves. Breaking away from old beliefs, old practices, and old habits that hinder and marginalize, and instead find our voice, perhaps for the first time, and our own constructive actions as we embrace Christ and follow where Christ is going. Jesus led the rallying cry against injustice. Jesus calls us all to use our lives to do the same. Would you pray with me? God, we all come to the garden. We all come to the garden alone as messengers. We all come to the garden alone as seekers. We all come to the garden alone hoping to receive the message. Protect us in the vineyard, but don't allow us to trade our safety and everyone liking us for our failure to speak up and defend the helpless and the broken. Like many of the heroines and heroes all around the world, teach us how to use our pens, our voices, our funds, and if need be, our very lives, to protect and defend those who cannot do so for themselves. help us to understand the radical nature of Jesus' love for all. In Jesus' name we